advice is always to put your thoughts on paper. Is that a lot of things are in your head, and as you put things on paper, it becomes a bit clearer on how you're going to execute it. So things that we've talked about is that, okay, you literally, it doesn't need to be very complicated at first. Like, you write down, this is my idea. And then you, as I said, you start to break down, okay, this is my idea. What is my product or service out of this idea? Okay. What is my market? How do I sell to my customer? And you try to answer these questions. And after that, you start breaking down all these items, but putting things on paper, because it sits in your head and maybe it's super clear to you, but first, as you put on paper, you will already judge a bit your idea, and also it's what you can share.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Expert. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com and grab some time with us to chat. Now, today we have another great guest on the podcast, Tristan Pelloux. And we're going to be talking with them a little bit about a lot, which is or how to launch a business and things you need to be aware of, how to go from an idea to a business, and then how to scale the business, and why a great idea doesn't matter as much as the execution does. Some of the practices you may want to consider about business planning, and even maybe a bit about idea validation and using data and using your data versus your gut and what role they may play. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Tristan.
Thanks for having me, Devin.
Absolutely. So now we've had you on the other podcast, The Inventive Journey, and we went through a bit of that. I'm excited to have you on The Inventive Expert. But for those that haven't caught that episode, and I definitely encourage people to go back and check that one out. But maybe just take a minute or two to introduce yourself a bit to the audience and why you have a background and experience in this area.
Yeah, sure. So I currently live in Barcelona. I moved here a year and a half ago after a few years in London working in corporate strategy and corporate finance. So a range of projects from IPO preparation to strategic planning and establishing joint venture, launching new products and working on strategic partnerships. After these years in London, I started working as an independent consultant, and since then I've helped businesses launch and also kind of help businesses that were stuck at the middle at the moment of their growth, try to fix some issues that they might have. And yeah, so that's what I do. I help people figuring out how to go to market, or how to go from, as you say, from an idea to an actual business. And that's the hard part.
Yeah, that is always that is the hard part. So I think that maybe this, and definitely thank you for the introduction. So maybe just diving into some of the topics at hand, and the one you hit on is a great place to start, which is, one of the things that I think people haven't, probably, or in no part or no small part due to television and movies and books and podcasts and everything else, is I think all I need is a great idea, and that will make for a great business. In other words, if I just have that one idea that's going to be or set me apart, that's going to be what matters, and then I'll, the business will just fall in place, and I'll be, money will rain from the sky, and everything will be great afterwards, which I think is far from the truth, in the sense that there's a lot more that goes into a business, and it's a lot more about execution, which is a little bit more or about what we talked about beforehand. So help us get an idea, give us a bit of insight as to what is the trade-off, or how do you, take what is a great idea, but actually, or why does execution matter, or how do you get started on execution?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, an idea is somehow important, but actually it doesn't matter so much. Is that if you look at some of the great businesses that have been built over the years, the ideas are generally not novel, or It's rather the execution. So if you look at, for instance, the iPad wasn't the first tablet around, but it was the one that worked better. Tesla wasn't the first electric car. So it's more about how you execute an idea. And you need to be like very organized and basically take your idea and kind of test it. So you try to, what you do is like you apply a framework, you build a business plan around your idea, and this is how you're going to see how you go from, okay, I have this, to, okay, what does it mean in terms of product? What does it mean in terms of distributing this product or services? What do I need in terms of people, in terms of finances? Is it viable? Because sometimes a great idea, actually to execute it, you realize you need a ton of money that you don't have. So you're like, okay, fine, it's a great idea, but it's never going to work. So there is this, I find it a gap between people's expectations. They're saying, yeah, I have a great idea, but unless you find someone that wants to execute it for you, you're going to have to find a way to execute it. And I mean, don't get me wrong, if you have a really great idea and a great execution, you have a killer business, sure. But it's better actually to have a okay idea, but a great execution, because you're going to have a business, rather than a great idea and a crappy execution, then your business is not going to be viable.
No, and I think that's definitely true, or holds true. Now, one of the questions I'll ask is kind of a bit of a follow up, which is, the difficult thing oftentimes is coming up with an idea. And I don't want to excuse that, because I think that there is, you do need to come up with an idea that people are willing to pay for, that you're excited about and they're passionate about. On the other hand, people come up with an idea and then they're kind of, okay, came up with the idea, now kind of what's next, or what do I do after I have the idea? And oftentimes they kind of get stuck, or they get stumbled there, because we say we need to execute on it, but they don't have any idea. They haven't done this before. They don't necessarily know how to execute. So once you have that idea, how do you go about figuring out what that execution is? In other words, how do you start to go about building the startup, or building that that business around the idea?
So as in any big problem, the easiest thing to do is to try to break it down. So you first try to break it down into big categories. So what is going to be the marketing? So how do I go to market? Who are my customers? So you try to break it down into, who are my customers? What do I sell to them? How do I sell it to them? So you try to break it down in these big categories, and then you look at this and you break it down even further. So, marketing. Okay, well, these are all the bits that I need to do in order to achieve this top objective. And basically, by doing so, you're actually building a business plan. And once you have your business plan, and you have all these steps and all these things that you need to do, this is how you have your plan, and then you start executing it. And this is how you go from basically your idea to an actual business. And so it takes a bit of time, obviously. But as I said, the thing is, you take it one step at a time. Is that first breaking out into three things, which is, okay, what's your product? Who are your customers? And how do you reach them? How do you sell to them? You answer these three questions, and then you go a bit deeper into the three things, and you add other things to it. But yeah, as I said, you need to be organized and methodical about it. Methodological.
And I think that definitely makes sense. And you kind of touched on one of the questions I was going to hit on, which is, okay, you have the idea, you say you break it down, but and you started to touch on, what are some of the things you should break it down into? In other words, should you first focus on who is your customer? Should you focus on the market size? Should you focus on how you're going to fund the business, or how you're going to pay for it? Because there's a lot of aspects, right? And there's building a team. There's, where do you do this? Do you have time? What is it going to cost to invest? And so, in other words, there's a lot of things to start to break down into the business plan. And if you've done it before, you have experience, great. Then you can, have a bit of a leg up. But if you're starting out for the first time, maybe you go online and you Google it, what do I put in a business plan, or how do I get a business started? But what are some of the kind of the key or the core areas that you start to work out as far as that business plan that you really should be considering?
So, I mean, two elements are quite key when you build a business is, well, actually it's one element, but you will hear a lot about finding product market fit, which just means that what you offer as a market. So that the two things that are quite key is that first look at the market. So you think you have an idea. Okay, is there a market for it? Is there anybody that is willing to pay for what you're offering? And sometimes there is a clear answer because sometimes you're looking at something that already exists. And in that case, it's easier to estimate your market. I don't know, you want to build a hotel in a city. So then more or less the industry, like how many hotels, so you can estimate your market. When you try to be innovative and launch something new, then you will need to find some proxies and estimate what your market looks like. And the reason why it's important to look at the market is that this is where you know if there is any money to be made and how much money you think you're going to be able to capture. Because sometimes you can have a great idea, but actually there is no market because no one is willing to pay for what you're offering, or the market is so tiny, or it's dominated by huge companies that are going to crush you, or you're never going to be able to compete on price. That's why looking at what the market is super important. And then you look at the product. Is that, okay, well, this is a market and this is what I'm offering. And then you try to see, okay, well, is there any value? Do I think customers are going to want this? And this is where you start to go into the next stage, which is try to see how you can estimate that customers are going to want it. So you can do surveys, or you can test it. You go into beta, you test it a bit, you see how people react to it. So it's quite key. But yeah, for me, market is super important. And then you go into because this is where with the market, this is where you see if there is any potential. And for instance, if you want to find an investor, what they're going to look at is your total addressable market, your serviceable addressable market. But what they're really interested about is, okay, how big is the market? The bigger the better, obviously, because this is giving you an idea of the potential size of the company. If the total market of your company is, I don't know, a few million, then your company can't be that big ultimately. But if it's hundreds of billions, then yes, your company can be huge, even if you capture a tiny bit of it.
I think that's the good points. I mean, I think that you have to look and say, okay, well, what's the address? It's a lot of times what they call the addressable market, right? In other words, how big is your market? Now that may be huge, but if you have no plan to get any piece of the market, it doesn't matter how big it is. You can say it's a $10 billion market, but if if there's a whole bunch of players and it's a crowded field, just because it's a big market doesn't mean you're able to get sales, and vice versa. It can be a $10 million market that maybe but there isn't anybody addressing it, or there's only one player, and you may be able to come in and get a very sizable piece of the pie out of the chute, and it may be worthwhile to go after. So I think that hitting both those 2 points of, one is how big is the market, but two, also how are you going to make an entrance, or what is your plan to capture some of that market. So now shifting gears just a bit, and so one of the other things is, so let's say you have the idea, you start to figure out, break it down for execution. You get the business plan, you get the business up and going a bit, and you say, okay, we've at least now making some income, making some, some profit, and now we're looking to scale. What are some of the ways that you should consider as far as scaling the business or growing that? In other words, there's kind of that, hey, we have to make something, or find some customers, they start to pay us, we have some sort of success, but now how do we get to that next step of growing it and expanding the marketplace? What are some thoughts or things that people should be considering as far as when they're scaling a business?
So what I've seen is that some people, without having this very organized approach to building a business, they just go for it, and as you say, they start to have a few customers and it works well, and then they hit like some kind of wall in scaling. And I find often that it's because they haven't done this work properly, like around building a proper business plan and trying to see how, how do you build more your business. And because the thing is, if you do a business plan properly, you know the resources that you need to get to the next level. You know what kind of marketing, what kind of distribution that will be required to actually go after more customers, what other products you could develop. So this is when you start organizing all that, is that, okay, I have this product and I have this number of customers. How do I grow more? Am I getting more customers? Am I launching a new product to address other needs? So I basically, like, I mean, to increase your turnover is that either you increase your prices, you launch a new product, so you like kind of address the same customer, but you sell them more stuff, or you get more customers. And so you need to like organize your business plan to know how you're going to grow, and then what resources are needed to do that. Do I need more salespeople? Do I need to invest more in marketing? But you need to do this work of figuring out where the growth is going to come from. And again, you come back to the market, is that, okay, well, I've gone to this market and I've captured a decent amount. Can I grow more? You look into it, you're like, actually, I don't think so, because the dynamics of the market are like this. But I could go into this adjacent market, or I could launch this new product like attached to it. So you go back to doing the same exercise. And actually, most companies are quite established. They do this exercise on a regular basis. It's not because you're established and you're okay, you're growing, but you still need to do this exercise to know where the growth is going to come from, but also where the threats might come from. Because you look at your market, maybe you're an established business, you look at your market and you're like, okay, there is this new guys, they're coming at us and they have this new product. So our assumptions are not going to work if they capture too many customers or stuff like that. So it's to have this constant approach to like driving your business in a very like organized manner. So my advice is always to go back to the drawing board and go back to the basics.
Oh, and I think that definitely makes sense. And one or follow-up question to that is, so how do you go about doing that? In other words, ones if you don't know, it's always it always is easy if you know the questions, or you can where to get started to get that information. But let's say, and I'll take an example. Let's say we're in the legal services, just because that's what I happen to be, and I do intellectual property. So I do patents and I do trademarks, and say, okay, I know my market fairly well. Now, should I, try and or throw more marketing dollars at the same market, and that's how I scale? In other words, I just go out and try and find more customers, but I don't know where I throw those dollars at. Or should I go out and try and expand the number of service or the types of services? So maybe we expand into divorce law, and I'm making it up, but those type of things. And so in that kind of real world application, how do you actually go about analyzing where's the opportunity or where you should look to scale? Because maybe I don't know, and I don't know, I'm not real familiar with how I go about analyzing that. How do you even get started?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is, you try to find a number of opportunities that you could go after. As you say, oh, is it increasing my marketing, or is it going into an adjacent market? Then once you've identified a few opportunities, you basically do a pros. Well, you can look at frameworks or stuff like that, but it amounts to doing pros and cons in doing that and not doing the other. And if I spend 10,000 more marketing, what am I expecting out of it? If I spend that amount and I do something else, am I getting better results? So it's kind of trying to estimate where, if you invest your time and money into something, what are the returns? What is the long-term opportunity, short-term? So you try to capture as much information and try to make a decision based on data. So I mean, it's the same, like the way to look at it is, let's say let's say I'm here in Spain and I want to expand into a market like another country. So I'll look at a few countries. I'll look at France, I'll look at Germany, I'll look at Italy, let's say. And I'll do just the pros and cons in like, okay, well, if I expand to this market, is my product going to fit? How much is going to cost me? What size is the market? What are the customers? And I do this across like different countries, and then I make a decision based on.
And where do you go
criteria.
about getting that information? Because I said you say you look at it, but you obviously have to get that information to begin with, right? You have to see what is the market, number of customers. Well, how do I know? How do I know how many people, going back to my example, let's say I wanted to go expand out my services. How do I know how many people in a given location need a divorce? Or how do I know how much they're willing to pay? So how do you actually go about, it's easy, easier once you have that information to compare them side by side. But how do you go about gathering that information?
Yeah, so that's the hard part is that usually, I mean, unless you're super lucky, it's not sitting here, you Google for 5 minutes and then you have like suddenly exactly this information. So usually either you have to pay for it or you have to estimate it. And this is where, as I said, like the hard part comes in, is that you need to do a bit of analysis around, okay, well, in this given market, how do I estimate the market? And it can be like quite complicated. I've done some market research, market analysis that can take quite a bit of time if you want to go granular, and if you want to, maybe you can estimate it by looking at competitors that are, for instance, are public, that might disclose information about the market. Or you look at all these you look at all the companies and the one that publish their results, and you try to see their turnover by division. So you can do like, you can spend a lot of time trying to estimate the size of a market or the number of customers, or looking at public data, or like, but there's no, I mean, there's no straightforward answer to that. It's just, it takes a bit of time and analysis. But the best thing is to try to have as much data as possible from trying to get reliable sources, and out of this trying to build some kind of view. And once you've done a bit of this homework, you try to bring it all together and get your view of that opportunity. But yeah, there's no, I mean, I've been doing this for a few years. So it's never quite easy. Sometimes it's faster than other times, because, as I said, sometimes you have a market and it's quite well defined, and maybe you're gonna have like, ideally you're gonna have like a competitor, like a public one that or that has disclosed this information. They said this market has that many customers, it's that big, and we're going after, and you're like, oh, perfect, then you have it. But most of the time it doesn't work that way.
All right, no, I think that's great guidance and pieces of advice. So as we start to wrap up the episode, and always plenty more things that we could chat on that never have enough time, but we've talked about quite a bit, everything from going to idea to execution, and how you might execute, things to consider, how you might scale, where you might find that information, and kind of a lot of things that people probably should and could get started on, but most of the time you're saying, hey, there's way more things that I probably should be doing that I have time to do. And so if they're to have kind of one takeaway, one thing that they should get started on, what would that one thing be?
My advice, because I'm doing some mentoring as well as consulting, and usually entrepreneurs that have just an idea. My advice is always to put your thoughts on paper. Is that a lot of things are in your head, and as you put things on paper, it becomes a bit clearer on how you're going to execute it. So things that we've talked about is that, okay, you literally, it doesn't need to be very complicated at first. Like, you write down, this is my idea. And then you, as I said, you start to break down, okay, this is my idea. What is my product or service out of this idea? Okay. What is my market? How do I sell to my customer? And you try to answer these questions. And after that, you start breaking down all these items, but putting things on paper, because it sits in your head and maybe it's super clear to you, but first, as you put on paper, you will already like judge like a bit your idea. Then also it's what you can share. If you want the advice of someone, you're like, okay, well, this is my idea, like a 1 page, this is what I'm gonna do, what do you think? Rather than you telling, it's easier to judge by reading something than if I'm telling you I'm gonna do this and that and that. I don't have time to analyze and really know if this is workable.
Oh, I think that that's definitely a great takeaway. I mean, I think the other thing when you're writing it down, putting your idea on, pen and paper, so to speak, is it also forces you to one think through all of those things that, a lot of times you may not think of through your head, or you gloss over or don't give enough thought. And two, it also helps you to sometimes identify those holes in where, or things where you may have thought were fine. And then when you actually have to write it down and figure it out, oftentimes you'll say, oh, that is a bigger deal or bigger issue, or it presents something that otherwise might not have considered. So I think that's definitely a great place to start. Well, as people want to reach out to you, if they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an investor, they want to be an employee, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
So they can find me on LinkedIn, or go on my website, strategy.com, and reach out through there, like hello@strategy.com. And I'm always happy to have a chat, hear people out, their story, what they want to do. Sometimes it's quick advice. I often break dreams, but that's a bit the reality, that I like to be honest. And sometimes, I can tell people, like, look, this is not going to work, and I'm sorry to tell you that your super idea is never going to work, but it is a reality. But yeah, people can reach out any place.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out to you, contact you, and use your services, because getting an idea to execution takes a lot of work, and then two, scaling the business is also it takes a different set of skills, and so definitely worthwhile to cultivate, and otherwise get mentorship and direction on how to do both of those. So, well, thank you again, Tristan, for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, just make sure to click subscribe, make sure to click share, and leave us a review, because we want to make sure that we can help as many entrepreneurs and startups and small businesses as possible. And the best way to do that is to share this episode with them, so they can get all of this great information. So with that, if you ever need help with patents, trademarks, or anything else with your business, feel free to go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. And thank you again, Tristan, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thanks for having me, Devin.